Well, thank you all for joining this afternoon's office hours session. Today we have Mark Bolinger, our Director of Projects and Programs, presenting on renewable energy certificate purchases and the environmental disclosure label related to 2024. So Mark said he was fine if folks want to ask questions throughout the presentation, so feel free to raise your hand or add things in chat. I'll be monitoring both of those, and Mark will respond as needed. And with that, take it away, Mark.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks, Jackson. And just so you know, I may not be able to see your hand raised. So either just verbally interrupt or, as Jackson just mentioned, I think he's going to monitor that. And so I'll maybe just pause at the end of each slide and folks can jump in with questions if they have them. So thanks everyone for joining today. And it's been maybe 2 or 3 months now since we finished up our purchasing of RECs for the 2024 compliance year, and then figured out what that meant for our environmental disclosure label. So it seemed like this was a good time to share all of that with you, and tell you how it went. So that's what we'll do here today. So I'll start off with just kind of some basic information on RECs for any of you who may not be totally familiar with what they are. So, start off by covering maybe like the 5 W's of RECs: the who, what, where, when, why, how, and so on. Specifically with how they relate to CPCNH. And then I'll give a little bit of a refresher on New Hampshire's Renewable Portfolio Standard. And at that point, I'll go into more detail on what RECs we actually purchased for the 2024 compliance year and how they translated into our environmental disclosure label. And then I want to just pivot a little bit and take a little detour to look at what Eversource did in 2024. Clifton made me aware of an Eversource filing that came out, I think, in late June as part of its rate case, maybe, where they disclosed a lot of details on their 2024 REC purchases. So I did a little analysis on that, and we'll compare their experience to ours, and it's I at least find it a little bit interesting. And then we'll conclude by looking ahead to the current 2025 compliance year and beyond. So to start off at a very basic level here, what is a REC? It's simply put, it's an accounting instrument that packages and conveys the attributes of 1 MWh or 1,000 kWh of generation. And by attributes, I mean, from where was the generation sourced, whether it's wind, solar, coal, hydro, what have you. Where is the generator located? How old is the generator? Is it considered new versus old, based on certain policy date thresholds? And there are other attributes as well. And the REC really packages all those things together. And the neat thing about RECs is they can be stripped out and sold separately from the underlying generation from which they were derived. And this is important because we obviously can't control the flow of electrons on the grid. So when a solar plant, for example, generates solar electricity, that's either consumed on site or some of it might flow into the grid. And at that point, it sort of mingles with all the other electrons out there. And you really can't control, you can't like physically deliver an electron to somebody over the grid. But RECs allow you to kind of pull those attributes of the different types of generation and track who is selling and buying those attributes. And in that way, you can sort of, at least financially or from an accounting perspective, actually deliver different types of generation. And for that reason, these RECs are also kind of a convenient tool to demonstrate policy compliance. And that is really the primary reason that we buy RECs, is to demonstrate compliance with New Hampshire's RPS. So we are obviously an electricity supplier in New Hampshire, which means that we are obligated by the RPS, and we need to demonstrate compliance with that by purchasing and retiring not only the correct type of RECs, and New Hampshire's RPS has 5 different REC classes, but also the correct number of RECs in each one of those 5 classes. The second reason we buy RECs is to supply the incremental renewable content in our opt-up products. And by that, I mean Granite Plus, Clean 50, and Clean 100. So each of those three opt-up products itself complies with the RPS. So, Clean 100 includes some mix of all of these five REC classes. But on top of that, each of these opt-up products layers on additional renewable generation to reach the stated or the advertised content totals of 33, 50, and 100% respectively. And we supply this additional content by buying New Hampshire Class 1 or Class 2 RECs. And at the end of 2024, roughly 12% of our accounts had chosen to opt up. So as a result of that, we do end up buying a fairly significant number of voluntary RECs as well. We purchased the vast majority of RECs through what I'll refer to as the bulk REC market. And by that, I mean we're buying them either directly from utility scale generators or else from aggregators or resellers who themselves are contracting with utility scale generators and buying those RECs and then reselling them to suppliers like CPCNH. There's sometimes also a kind of a third-party broker involved to kind of match up buyers and sellers. These brokers have their fingers in both the buy and sell side, and they can be useful in helping us to find RECs that we might not otherwise find on our own. So we purchased roughly or a little more than 176,000 RECs this way for the 2024 compliance year. We purchased another 24 RECs through our REC Aggregation Program, which launched in late December of 2024. And that number is so small due really just to the late 2024 launch. But it will grow going forward. Current enrollment in the program, the generators who are currently enrolled are capable of generating about 2,000 RECs per year. So we will see this number increase going forward. And the vast majority of those are solar RECs. And then the final way we buy RECs, or we will buy RECs going forward, is through long-term power purchase agreements, and specifically bundled PPAs. So I talked earlier about how RECs can be kind of stripped out and sold separately from the underlying power. Well, you can also, bundle them together with the energy and sell all of that together through a long-term power purchase agreement. And that's the way our Poverty Plains contract is set up. And once this project comes online in mid-2026, it will generate more than 8,000 RECs per year. So we will pick up some more solar RECs that way. In terms of when we buy RECs, it's important to note that we never really know what our final REC obligation for a given year is going to be until early in the following calendar year. And that is because we're never quite sure exactly what our load is until maybe a month or two after the fact due to the effect of refreshes or launches or folks opting in or out. And then product selection, folks who opt up or down will also affect how many RECs we need because our different products have different REC requirements. In addition, the New Hampshire Department of Energy in recent years has reduced the Class 3 requirement, in particular after the fact. So, for example, in this year, in I think it was early February 2025, the DOE kind of retroactively reduced the Class 3 requirement from 8% down to 1%. And so we have to wait for that determination to happen before we know exactly how many RECs we actually need. And so because of that, to date, and by to date, I mean really just 2024 and 2023 compliance years, since we've only been operating since April 2023, we've really just mostly procured our RECs within a concentrated month or two period leading up to the mid-June of the subsequent year compliance deadline. And this wait and see approach or wait until the last minute approach has worked okay so far. But as we grow and as we presumably will continue to grow going forward, this approach has is becoming a little bit riskier in the sense that if we wait too long, then there's a risk that we may not find all of the RECs that we need, which means that we would be forced to pay what are known as alternative compliance payments or ACPs. And these ACPs will invariably cost more than they would. They're priced higher than the market price. They effectively set a cap on the market price. And so if you have to pay ACPs, you are pretty much by definition paying an above market cost, which we would like to avoid. And in addition, these ACP payments really don't do much to support renewables. With the budget bill that came out of the New Hampshire legislature earlier this year, ACPs are now flowing pretty much directly into the New Hampshire General Fund. So if you can buy the REC, theoretically, you're providing some support for the generator, whereas if you pay an ACP, it's almost like a tax in some sense. And so for this reason, I think going forward, presuming we have adequate liquidity to do so, we should really be seeking to buy RECs on more of a gradual and opportunistic basis throughout the year. And I'll just note that obviously our REC Aggregation Program, our PPA with Poverty Plains, and any PPAs that we may add under the Aspire solicitation that's currently on the street are certainly steps in this direction. Okay, so now we'll turn to a quick refresher on New Hampshire's RPS. I've already mentioned New Hampshire has 5 different RPS classes. You can see them across the top of this table. And I've shaded 2024 in green since that's the compliance year we're focusing on. So the Class 1 non-thermal requirement was 11.9% in 2024. And Class 1 non-thermal is basically composed of new, quote unquote, new generation from a wide variety of renewable resources. And I put new in kind of air quotes there because the statutory threshold or determination of new is really outdated at this point. So a project only has had to have come online since 2005 in order to be considered new. So at this point, we are effectively calling generators that are, essentially 20 years old, new plants, which seems a little odd. Class 1 thermal was added to the RPS in the mid 2010s. You can see it was zeroed out up until, I guess, 2014. It currently stands at 2.2%, and this is composed primarily of kind of smaller biomass heating plants. So think of a pellet boiler that you might see at a school or a municipal complex or a healthcare facility or something like that. Class 2 is new solar, and then class 3 and 4 are existing resources. So class 3 is existing biomass or methane, and class 4 is existing small hydro. Now, there are a couple things to know about the RPS in 2024. First one here that I'll talk about, for the second year in a row, the class 2 requirement of 0.7% was fully met by what's known as REC sweeping. And REC sweeping, as some of you may know, is a policy in New Hampshire that allows suppliers to claim the generation from any customer generator. So for example, any residential PV system, let's say, that has not formally gone through the process to register that generator with the New Hampshire DOE as being eligible to generate RECs. And so, this is kind of a controversial policy, and I believe it's been challenged on a legal basis as constituting what's known as a taking of private property. And I think there's probably some merit to those challenges, but REC sweeping currently is the law in New Hampshire. And so what that means is that we were not required to buy any solar RECs to comply with the 2024 Class 2 requirement.
Mark, before you move on, there is a question in chat from Bruce Tucker just asking if CPCNH will buy Class 1 thermal RECs.
Class 1 thermal?
Mm-hmm.
Through the aggregation program, I presume, is the question. And the answer to that is yes. And we have already bought some Class 1 thermal through our REC aggregation program. We also buy a lot of class one thermal from a kind of a reseller. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later. All right, so the second thing to note, I think I've already mentioned that DOE retroactively reduced the class three requirement from 8% down to 1%. And so what that means is the total RPS percentage was supposed to be 24.3, but it actually ended up being 17.3. And if you look back a few years, you can see that the RPS is now lower than it was back in 2017 through 2019. So in a way, we're sort of moving in the wrong direction, it seems. So based on the RPS requirement, this table here shows the number of RECs that we bought across these five classes. So this third column shows the RPS percentage, which you just saw on the prior slide, adds up to 17.3. And then this REC percentage column shows the percentage of our load met by RECs in each of these categories. So for class one non-thermal, we actually exceeded the RPS there, and that is because we had to buy 19,506 voluntary RECs for those opt-up products, with the rest going for RPS compliance. For the class one thermal, we bought just enough to satisfy our RPS obligation. For class two, again, we did not need to buy this 0.7% due to the REC sweeping credit, but we did, as I mentioned earlier, purchase 24 solar RECs through our REC aggregation program. For class three, we also just met the minimum RPS. And then for class four, we were only able to find about 30% of what we needed. So that's represented by these 4,485 RECs, which left more than 10,000 RECs, class four RECs, where we had to pay the ACP. And by paying that ACP, we ended up paying roughly $30,000 more than we otherwise would have if we had been able to find this many RECs in the market. So these numbers are all based on our 2024 load, which came in around 1 terawatt hour of generation. That was roughly 3 times our 2023 load. So we purchased basically more or less 3 times the number of RECs that we had in 2023 as well. And the total cost of this REC purchase, including the ACPs, came in at more than 7.1 million. So this has grown to a pretty significant chunk of change for CPCNH. All right, so now let's get into the specific generators from whom we bought the RECs. This table shows just the class one non-thermal and class two, 3, and 4. And then on the next slide, I'll show you the class one thermal. I couldn't fit them all on one page, so I broke out the class one thermal onto a separate slide. So the green shading here shows generators or facilities that are located in CPCNH member communities. And so in this case, this is really just the Burgess Biopower plant up in Berlin, as well as, for these 24 RECs that we bought through the REC aggregation program, I think 18 of those came from member communities as well. The blue shading here shows those RECs that we allocated to our opt-up products. And so that is primarily this wind project in Western New York, along with a few solar RECs from our aggregation program. And then here we see just the class one thermal RECs. So again, these are tend to be like wood chip boilers or pellet boilers, things like that, that supply heating for the most part to, or maybe I guess exclusively heating, or in some cases biofuels as well, I believe, to various municipal facilities for the most part, but also a few medical centers and things like that. And here you can see a lot more of these came from member communities. So all of those REC purchases make their way into our environmental disclosure label and determine what that looks like. This year we've structured the environmental disclosure label exactly the same as we did last year. So if you were able to get comfortable with this format last year, then it should look familiar this year as well. So I'll walk you through this, and I want to start with this kind of right-hand portion of the table here, specifically looking at the system mix, which represents the total mix of generation, physical generation within New England during 2024. And so by physical, I mean, this really represents the mix of electrons that were, flowing through New England's grid during the 2024 year. Right next to that, we've got the residual mix. And the residual mix basically shows you what is left of the system mix after having accounted for all the RECs that have been sold off and or retired. So, obviously, it's the renewable RECs that are in demand. The non-renewable generators don't necessarily really even generate RECs. So it shouldn't be surprising to see that the residual mix has very low remaining renewable content compared to the system mix, and that most of the residual mix is made up of non-renewable generation. And this distinction is important because whenever you go into the market to make a wholesale power purchase or a system power purchase, that purchase is going to have the environmental characteristics of the residual mix and not of the system mix. And again, that's because the system mix, the generators that make up the system mix have already sold off most of the associated RECs with their generation. And we cannot claim the attributes of that generation from which RECs have been sold to other parties. We can only claim the attributes of the RECs that we actually buy. So for a product like Granite Basic, this product here is composed, more than 80% of this product is composed of the residual mix. And so a big portion of Granite Basic has the environmental characteristics of the residual mix. These emissions characteristics come from NEPOOL, the NEPOOL Generation Information System, which is New England's REC tracking and accounting and trading system. So that's where they come from. And if you kind of look at the left side of this table and march from left to right, from Granite Basic through Plus, 50, and 100, you can see that the emissions profiles of these products improve pretty dramatically, particularly when you get to Clean 100. Now, Clean 100 is not all the way to zero here in terms of emissions, and that is because, again, remember that we meet the renewable portfolio standard for each of these products, and some of those RPS classes are exclusive to biomass, which has some emissions associated with it. So you can see that even in Clean 100, there's some biomass here, which is renewable, so it fits into Clean 100, but there are some associated emissions, at least how NEPOOL goes about counting that. And so we can't get all the way to zero here for Clean 100.
Mark, yeah, there's a hand up from Steve Holmgren. Go ahead,
Yeah.
Steve.
Yeah, I was trying to understand the comment about the wholesale market power being the residual mix percentages. Is wholesale market, is that what we buy through our advanced contract purchases?
Yeah, so pretty much every day, Calpine is going into the wholesale market and buying wholesale power on our behalf to supply our loads. And so all of those purchases that Calpine is making have the emissions content or emissions profile of the residual mix, not the system mix. So unless you like specifically contract with the generator and receive the RECs as part of that transfer, or else you go out into the market and buy RECs to kind of cover your wholesale power purchases, then you're really just looking at the emissions profile of the residual mix. Does that clear it up?
Yeah. And I guess kind of a follow-on, you talked about there were RECs that weren't available in certain classes. You can't use RECs from another class to cover your obligation for RECs that are not available in the market?
So you are able to do that in a limited fashion, and I think the only place this is possible is you can use Class 2 RECs, which are solar RECs. You can use any Class 2 RECs that have not been used or have not been applied towards the Class 2 obligation, you can use those to satisfy your Class 1 obligation. And so, yeah. But I don't think you can use, I'm almost certain you cannot substitute like Class 3 RECs for Class 4 or anything like that. I think it's really just the Class 2 and 1 that are slightly interchangeable.
Thank you.
Yep. All right. So a few oddities you might note if you've been looking at the composition of these products here. The first thing is you might wonder why Granite Basic is coming in at 18.5% instead of 17.3%, which is the RPS percentage. And the reason for that is because, as I mentioned before, more than 80% of this product is composed of the residual mix, which, as you can see here, has a renewable content of 1.4%. So the formula here is you start with 17.3, which is the RPS percentage, and then you add in the residual mix renewable content for the balance of product, which is represented by this 100% minus 17.3%. And that gets you to 18.5. And that's the same reason that Granite Plus is 34 instead of 33, and Clean 50 is 50.7 instead of just 50. And then I guess the final thing I'll note here is, as I said before, we did not have to buy any Class 2 RECs because of the solar REC sweeping credit. But we do get credit for that 0.7% RPS obligation, even though we didn't have to buy the RECs. And so 0.7% is really our starting point here. And then again, we add in the residual mix solar content of 0.6% for the balance of the product. And that gets us to 1.2%. So that's the disclosure label. And I guess now I'd like to turn to the Eversource comparison. And again, this is the first year that I've seen this. It was interesting to me to take a look at it, in part because I think Eversource is probably the largest buyer of RECs in New Hampshire, and I think CPCNH might be the second largest buyer of RECs. So it's interesting to me, at least, to kind of compare our relative experience. So,
Hey, Mark,
Jack's nice to meet you.
before you dive into this, there's a question from Dave Hemingway in the chat, and it asks, does that mean we don't actually have to be as high for REC purchases since we're already getting those renewable percentages, or is this only applicable due to the label?
So I presume Dave's talking about, since we can basically
Right.
take credit for some of these, can we kind of scale back our REC purchase? And the answer to that is theoretically, yes, but in practice, I think it's hard because we don't know what this percentage is going to be until after, basically after the deadline. This is determined kind of retroactively after the trading period for, in this case, the 2024 RECs has passed. So we can't really plan for it, is what I'm saying. I think we can plan for the REC sweeping credit. I think it's pretty obvious that, if Class 2 stays at 0.7%, we'll probably never have to buy a Class 2 REC for RPS purposes. But we do plan for that. Like we don't buy those RECs sort of in advance. We do buy them through the REC Aggregation Program, and we will be buying them through the Poverty Plains contract. But the way we're kind of thinking about those Class 2 RECs is that we can use them either for our opt-up products, or they can actually be substituted for Class 1 RECs through the response I just gave to Steve's question about how those two are somewhat interchangeable. So hopefully that answers Dave's question. Okay, so the Eversource comparison. So I guess we'll just run through the table quickly here. So in terms of the number of REC counterparties, so these are the folks with whom we traded RECs. We both had 6 different counterparties that we worked with, and we had 3 of those in common. So between the 2 of us, we were working with 9 different counterparties. Eversource bought more than 250,000 Class 1 RECs compared to our 140,000. We got a slightly better price, which was nice to see because the Class 1 requirement makes up the bulk of our RPS cost. For Class 1 thermal RECs, we bought similar volumes at the same exact price. And in fact, we bought those from the same exact aggregator. There's a single aggregator that has I won't say cornered the market, but they tend to sweep up a lot of the Class 1 thermal RECs in New Hampshire, and looks like we were both working with that same counterparty. For Class 2, Eversource didn't buy any because of the REC sweeping credit. We bought 24 through the REC Aggregation Program. For Class 3, we got a slightly worse price than Eversource on roughly twice the volume. And the fact that our volume is larger here suggests that Eversource couldn't find all of the Class 3 RECs that they need, and they therefore had to pay an alternative compliance payment. For Class 4 RECs, it's kind of the opposite. It looks like they got close to their fill, whereas we could only find 4,400, but our price was $1 per REC better, which is nice. So if we look at all of the RECs, they bought about 321,000 versus our 177,000. And for them, it worked out to 12.4 million versus our 6.8. And then you have to add to that the alternative compliance payment. Ours was exclusively in the Class 4 category, whereas theirs, I think, was spread across just about all of the different REC classes. And theirs was pretty hefty at 1.81 million. Looks like maybe a few more questions came in, so let me pause there first.
There's a question from Dave asking to clarify what the ACP rate per REC for this time frame was.
Yeah, I could probably pull up. I don't know. Let me see if I can do this without.
And basically, he's really trying to get at, did we make out better by buying through a broker or there are other options rather than by paying the ACP?
Yeah, so all right. So instead of bringing up the exact ACP numbers, I'll just note that for most of the REC classes, the ACP is not that much higher than where the market prices are. So it kind of like sets a ceiling price, and then the market sort of trades up to that ceiling. But that's not true for Class 1 non-thermal, which is the biggest category. So there, you can see the weighted average prices that we were paying, around $40. The ACP for 2024 for Class 1 non-thermal was more like $62 or something like that. So it was pretty significantly above where the market was trading. And so, when you're looking to fulfill our needs, you want to be sure to get all of the Class 1 non-thermal that you need because you don't want to be paying that ACP. But for some of these other classes, there's not a huge penalty if you have to pay the ACP. It's always going to be more, but maybe not that much more. For example, I think I mentioned for Class 4, we paid this amount of ACP, but if we had been able to buy the actual RECs themselves, this number, we would have paid about 330,000 in that case. So we paid roughly $30,000 extra for Class 4 because we could not find all the RECs that we needed. I'm not sure if that addresses Dave's question or not. Yeah. Okay. Anything else, or should I move on?
I think you can move on for now.
Great. So one other thing that came out of this comparison to Eversource has to do with timing. So I touched on this earlier, how we kind of have been sort of waiting towards the end of the trading period to buy the bulk of our RECs, and Eversource, it turns out, has not really been doing that. So this graph here shows the 12 months of the trading period for 2024 vintage RECs, and Eversource, they spread out their purchase. They had 29 different trade dates spread across 9 months, so they're shown here in blue. Whereas we had 9 separate trade dates spread across 3 months, but really just 2 months because I think the third month is January here, where we bought just 8 RECs through the REC Aggregation Program. So you really can't even count January. So We did the bulk of our REC purchasing in April of 2025, which was just kind of a month, basically a month in advance of the early June deadline for wrapping this up. And there are obviously multiple ways to do this, but I think as we grow bigger and the financial stakes grow, I guess I would be more comfortable leaning more towards an Eversource-like approach of just looking at this each month on kind of an opportunistic basis and trying to spread out our purchase a little bit to avoid some of that risk that comes from waiting until the last minute. So looking ahead, for this compliance year, which is 2025, we're going to need to buy roughly 1.5 times as many RECs as we did for 2024. And that is due to the fact that throughout 2024, our load was growing. We had several launches, some refreshes. And what that means is that some of our load was only online for part of the year, whereas in 2025, that new load that came online in 2024 is online for the entire year. In addition, the RPS will likely be slightly higher, either at 25.2% or something more like 18.2 if the DOE reduces the Class 3 requirement once again. So those two factors will push our load up and our REC need up by roughly 1.5x. Presumably, Eversources will shrink a little bit as a result of that same confluence of factors that I just mentioned. So, I think we'll probably be a little bit more on par with them in terms of volume in 2025. Due to the kind of the ongoing liquidity issues that we've been experiencing, we will likely need to wait until the spring of 2026 to buy the bulk of our RECs once again, with the exception of the REC Aggregation Program, where we pay for RECs quarterly. But as I've already touched on several times, I think going forward, once we're on sounder financial footing, I think we should really look to normalize this across the year to the extent that we can to try and minimize our risk to some extent. And then the final thing I'll note here is something that I think I brought up last year when I gave a similar presentation on this, and that is that our opt-up products are currently fairly expensive relative to those offered by some of our competitors. And that is because we are supplying the additional renewable content for those products from or using New Hampshire Class 1 and Class 2 RECs, which are pretty expensive. Whereas our competition seems to be sourcing their RECs nationally from places like Texas, where you can buy a wind REC very cheaply for next to nothing. And so that makes our Clean 100 product maybe look not so competitive compared to some of what our competitors are offering. And so I guess I just wanted to throw it out there that we could look to either change the way we do this, or maybe what would be more appropriate would be to think about adding a new product that would offer 100% renewable, but that is supplied, or at least the voluntary portion of that being supplied by cheaper RECs elsewhere. I don't know if there's demand for that among our membership or not, but just wanted to throw it out there that we could do something like that if there's an appetite for that. Was there a question there, Jackson, or should I keep going? Keep going. Okay.
Keep going, Mark. Thanks.
All right. So I think this is my last slide. So for extra credit here, just wanted to give a shout out to this podcast, which I listened to last night, actually. It's the latest from Volts, which became available earlier this week. And it's called The Debate Over Renewable Energy Certificates. And David Roberts and his two guests in this case spend an hour or so talking about a variety of topics, such as compliance versus voluntary REC markets, how to make sure that the way in which you buy RECs maximizes your impact in terms of additionality, making sure you're actually supporting generation. For example, whether you're procuring RECs on the spot market versus through long-term PPAs. And then there's, two things I found particularly interesting here are two different sort of emerging and to some extent competing schools of thought on how to improve the current system. And one of those involves really increasing the temporal, in particular, granularity of RECs. So right now, RECs are kind of created on a quarterly basis, but there's a movement afoot to really make that much more granular and break RECs out on an hourly basis, as that would allow companies and suppliers to match their load to generation on a 24/7 basis. So the idea being that, if you're consuming electricity during the night, then you would have to actually buy like a hydro REC or a biomass REC or some other basically a non-solar REC, because you're not, your solar system is not going to be generating in the middle of the night here. So the idea is to kind of more finely tune and match up these two things on an hourly basis. And then, kind of a competing theory here is that the main reason that we're doing all of this is to ideally reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And so the idea of this second school of thought is to not worry so much about 24/7 matching, but instead focus on the emissions impact of your REC purchase. And so the name they've coined for this is emissionality, which is kind of a play on additionality. And the idea here is that if your load is located in a region that has a pretty clean grid already, then you may actually have greater impact supporting a generator that's, halfway across the country in a dirtier grid than you would supporting a local generator that's operating in a cleaner grid already. So anyway, if anyone is, hankering for more here on RECs and really wants to kind of wonk out, I would suggest you take a look at or give a listen to this podcast. And that's all I had. Thanks everybody for your attention and questions so far. And let's see, looks like we have a little more time if there are more questions.
Great. Thank you, Mark. Really well done. I do see a hand up, but I'm going to go to the chat first because that came in a moment ago. And in the chat, there is a question from Charlie Niebling, who's asking, CPCNH was neutral on some of the legislation attacking the RPS this past session, HB 219 and HB 224. Just curious to know why, if the RPS fulfills the goal of incentivizing more renewables in New Hampshire, including community power communities. I don't believe Dina is on the call at this time. So Mark, I don't know if you have perspective on that to share.
No, I was kind of hoping Dina was on too.
Yeah.
I think that's probably, I don't know if there's anyone on who regularly participates in the RLAC meetings, but they would probably have more insight on that than I would.
Yeah, Charlie, we may need to circle up with Dina and get back to you on that particular question. And then looks like Dave Hemingway has a reply, but I'll move over to Steve Holmgren. Go ahead, Steve.
Well, you asked about the possibility of new products that would have, a cheaper, REC profile. I think that could be a great idea. I mean, I had been a customer of Direct Energy, and they were selling, power at 10 cents a kilowatt hour that was 100% clean. So now I know why, because they're using cheap Texas RECs. So if we have to compete against these people head to head, then maybe it makes sense for us to do the same thing they're doing. And then maybe we have an additional product that's called New England Clean, where we're just using New England RECs or something. I don't know.
Yeah, no, I think that could be the way to go, to maybe offer both variations, because some people might want to support the higher cost local RECs or the local generators, but others might be fine supporting a wind plant in Texas. And just to give you a sense for the difference in magnitude and cost, so the New Hampshire Class 1 RECs this past year were trading at around $40 per REC. But you could buy like a Texas wind REC for just $2 or $3 per REC. So it's quite a difference. So so Steve, I think that's something that we'll probably take a look at in the projects and programs committee going forward, and see if see if it has any traction to move beyond that.
Thanks.
Okay, anything else there?
No, I'm looking, monitoring hands. Beth McGuinn is sort of making or asking a question, which I think is a good one. Can we survey the relatively few who have opted up about their preferences? So that would be, trying to targeting communications to folks that are utilizing those Clean 50, Clean 100 products and asking them, if they prefer that those RECs are sourced more regionally or if they would rather have a lower price with nationally sourced RECs.
Yeah, and I think that's definitely a good idea. But I guess I'll just clarify that it wouldn't have to be, we could offer both, I guess is what I'm saying.
Yeah, I think so. Yep.
So these folks, if they could express their preference with their dollars to some extent. Yeah.
Okay. It's good discussion. Not seeing any other hands at this time. I see that Andrew has gone on camera. Did you have a comment or a question, Andrew, eventually?
Yeah, just one quick one. During recent conversations, I understood something had gone down in Connecticut that might affect the rec market in New England, and there was some chatter about that, but I haven't heard much recently. Is there anything to comment on that, Mark?
Yeah, Connecticut, as part of their budget bill this year, reduced their highest tier requirement, RPS requirement. I think they dropped it by roughly 10 percentage points, something like that. And as a result, the Connecticut Class 1 RECs sold off a fair amount, or by several dollars per REC, and that sort of affected the entire New England market because New England it's a regional market, and so what happens in one state affects the other states, and a lot of these RECs are sort of cross-qualified in multiple states. So the New Hampshire RECs did sell off a few dollars per REC, but they seem to have stabilized. And I guess maybe a second factor that's kind of countering that to some extent is you're all probably aware that a lot of the offshore wind projects have been delayed or maybe in some cases canceled. And so that is sort of revising expectations about the amount of supply that's going to be coming online in the next few years as well. And so if you look at REC forecasts, even though the Connecticut change has happened, which dropped prices kind of immediately in the near term, the longer term projections are actually in some cases for higher prices going forward because the offshore wind, which was going to bring quite a bit of REC quantity or REC volume to the market, has been pushed back by a few years at least. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's interesting. Beth, I see you have a hand up. Go ahead.
Thanks, Jackson. Just to clarify my question about the RECs, I live in a town that has 2 utilities, and our communications to folks about the different prices per utility, and then.
And so I think you're commenting on the fact that for this rate period, we've broken out rates or we've differentiated them by utility and customer class. And so we're already kind of, bifurcating things quite a bit. Yeah, that's a good point.
And then Steve, I think you have maybe another question or comment.
Yeah, well, yeah, I guess, and kind of along those lines, I think if our competition has kind of shifted, because of our inability to beat prices for the utilities, and a lot of reasons there. But I mean, I think strategically it might be to our advantage to migrate to the national RECs as a way of showing, hey, we've got all these other products, that are cleaner. We're using national RECs, but they're still cleaner, and therefore that's a better sales pitch than trying to beat the utilities at their lowest price. I don't know, it just seems like a possible strategy.
Yep. Yeah, and again, I view this as a
Excuse
discussion.
me, I can't get my hand up. It's Lee Oxenham.
Go
Yeah.
ahead, Lee.
Thank you. I have a different point of view here. The purpose of the RPS and RECs was to get more renewable energy by trying to get low cost and taking cheap products on already existing wind in Texas. We're defeating one of the key missions of this organization, which is to increase renewable energy. And when I have to go to the public and talk about why it is that we're higher than the utilities, I keep saying, but we're doing more for renewable energy. And so that I think we need to be really, I hate the fact that we're using REC sweeping at all. But
Yeah.
yeah, it saved us a huge amount of money and we probably would have been, on the rocks without it. But enough said about REC sweeping.
Yep. And just to clarify, each of our products does meet the RPS, and those RECs have to come from New England. And there's very specific requirements for each of those 5 REC classes. So we're really talking about sort of the voluntary component of each of those products. But yeah, your point is well taken.
Thank you.
Okay, anything else?
Not seeing anything else in the chat. I guess I'll given that there's about 5 minutes left, last call for questions or comments in the group. A comment from Joel and Courtney saying great program and thank you, Mark. Agreed.
Yeah. Well, thanks everybody for tuning in. I know it's a beautiful afternoon out there, so hopefully you can get out and enjoy the rest of it.
Awesome. All right. Thank you all for joining and for your participation. We really appreciate it and hope everyone has a great weekend.